My parents believed forcing me to take a city bus to my university graduation was a minor humiliation, a detail destined to fade after the ceremony. While my sister drove her brand new SUV, they assumed I would simply swallow the insult to keep the peace. They made a critical miscalculation that afternoon. They forgot that I do not just remember slights, I document them. My name is Lauren Whitmore. I am 27 years old, and I have spent the majority of my life trying to shrink myself to fit into the corners of a sprawling house in the American Midwest. Today was the day I finally earned my master's degree in data analytics, a milestone that represented 6 years of sleepless nights and student loans solely in my name. It should have been a morning of shared pancakes and nervous excitement. Instead, I stood on the asphalt of our driveway, clutching my polyester gown in a garment bag, watching my father hand a set of keys to my half-sister, Jessica. She was 22. She had barely managed to scrape a passing grade in her communications major. Yet, there she was, screaming in delight as the sunlight hit the hood of a brand new pearl white SUV. "It's for your big day, sweetheart," my father shouted, his voice booming with a pride that I had never managed to extract from him. "We need to make sure you get to the ceremony in style." I stood 5 feet away, invisible. My stepmother, Linda, finally turned her gaze toward me. She offered a tight, pitying smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lauren." "Honey," Linda said, smoothing the front of her silk dress. "With the new car and the equipment Dad is bringing to film Jessica, we just don't have room for you in the back seat. And the sedan is, well, it's acting up again. Technical issues. You understand." "Right." I looked at the sedan parked in the garage. I had driven it yesterday to pick up groceries. It was running perfectly. There was no technical issue. There was only a preference issue. "It's fine," I said, my voice steady, though my stomach churned with acid. "The number 42 bus stops at the corner in 10 minutes. I will meet you there." "You're such a trooper," my father said, not even looking away from Jessica and her new car. "See you at the stadium." The bus ride was a 45-minute ordeal through the humid heat of early June. The air conditioning on the public transit system had failed weeks ago. I sat squeezed between a man who smelled of stale tobacco and a teenager playing music without headphones. Sweat trickled down my spine, threatening to stain the dress I had bought from a discount rack specifically for this occasion. I held my cap and gown on my lap, protecting them from the grime of the seat, treating them with the reverence my family refused to show me. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from social media. Linda had already posted a photo. It showed the 3 of them, Dad, Linda, and Jessica, leaning against the hood of the new SUV, beaming with telegenic happiness. The caption read, "So proud of our girl, big things ahead." There was no mention of me, no mention that they had 2 daughters graduating today. I stared at the screen. The lie about the sedan was clumsy. The exclusion was deliberate. Most people would have cried. Most daughters would have felt a heartbreak that shattered their composure. I simply felt a cold clarity wash over me, cooling the heat of the bus. I closed my eyes and replayed Linda's voice in my head. "The sedan is well, it's acting up again." I memorized the inflection. I memorized the way my father's back was turned to me when he handed over the keys. I memorized the exact time, 8:45 in the morning. This was not the first time they had pushed me to the margins. It was not the first time I had been asked to accommodate Jessica's comfort at the expense of my dignity. But as the bus lurched forward, carrying me toward a ceremony where I would walk across the stage alone, I realized something vital. This was simply the first time they had been arrogant enough to make it this obvious. They thought this was just a bad commute. They had no idea that while they were taking pictures, I was taking notes. The silence of my rented apartment was a sharp, welcoming contrast to the noise of the stadium. I hung my graduation gown in the closet, pushing it to the back behind my work blazers. This apartment was small, a 3rd-floor walk-up with creaky floorboards and a view of a brick wall, but I paid for every square inch of it with money I had earned. There were no strings attached here, no obligations, no emotional debts that could be called in at a moment's notice. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the familiar interface of my work dashboard. I am a junior analyst at Northbridge Analytics. My job is not glamorous to most people. I spend 10 hours a day sifting through massive data sets, looking for anomalies. I track spending patterns, identify corporate waste, and flag irregularities that suggest fraud or mismanagement. Northbridge taught me that numbers do not lie, but people often do. People hide their sins in the margins. They bury their secrets in complex ledgers, assuming no one will have the patience to connect the dots. For years, I had applied this blindness to my own life. I had accepted my family's behavior as simple favoritism, a painful but common dynamic. But the image of that pearl-white SUV burned in my mind, forcing me to look at the data points of my childhood with the cold detachment of a professional auditor. I started to mentally catalog the financial history of the Whitmore family. When I was 18, I was accepted into a prestigious state university. My father had sat me down at the kitchen table, his face grave. "Lauren," he had said, sighing heavily as he looked at the tuition bill, we don't have the liquidity right now. The market has been brutal to your stepmother's investments. You'll need to take out loans." I had nodded, grateful that they were at least honest with me. I took out the loans. I worked 2 jobs. I graduated with debt that would follow me for a decade. Yet, 3 years later, when Jessica wanted to attend a private liberal arts college that cost nearly double my tuition, the liquidity issue miraculously vanished. There were no loans for Jessica. There were checks written directly from the family account. Then there were the birthdays. My 16th birthday had been a pizza dinner at home. Jessica's 16th birthday had been a catered event at the country club with a live DJ. At the time, I told myself that business had just picked up. I told myself it was timing, not malice. But as I sat there, staring at my screensaver, a notification popped up in my inbox. It was an email from my father. The subject line read, "Insurance docs. Urgent." I frowned. I had my own insurance. I clicked it open and realized immediately that it was a mistake. He had meant to forward the document to their insurance broker, but because my name starts with the same letter as the broker's, autofill had betrayed him. Attached was a PDF regarding the insurance policy for the new SUV. It was standard paperwork, boring and bureaucratic. I was about to delete it when a specific line in the forwarded message history caught my eye. It was a reply from their financial advisor, dated 2 days ago. "Per your request, the $60,000 for the vehicle purchase has been drawn from the Whitmore Educational Trust, labeled under incidental student support. This keeps the main account tax neutral for the fiscal year." I froze. Whitmore Educational Trust. I had never heard of this trust. When I applied for financial aid, I had to list my parents' assets. I had to declare everything. If this trust existed, why had it never appeared on my FAFSA forms? Why was I told there was no money for my books, no money for my dorm, no money for my future? I leaned back in my chair, my heart rate remaining eerily steady. A normal daughter would call her father and scream. A normal daughter would demand an explanation for why her sister's luxury car was classified as student support while she had ridden a bus to her own graduation. But I was not just a daughter anymore. I was an analyst. And I had just found an outlier. Incidental student support. I whispered to the empty room. If there was a trust, there were records. If there were records, there was a paper trail. And if they were using an educational fund to buy cars for one child while burdening the other with debt, that was not just unfair, it was a discrepancy. I did not feel jealous of the car. I did not even feel the sting of the rejection anymore. What I felt was the cold, hard click of a puzzle piece falling into place. They had not just preferred Jessica. They had built a financial architecture designed to benefit her while pleading poverty to me. I looked at the email again. I did not delete it. I saved it to an encrypted hard drive. Then I opened a new spreadsheet. I named the file Project Bus Fare. I was going to find out exactly how much I was worth to them. Not because I wanted their money, but because I demanded to know the equation they had used to subtract me from the family. Public records are surprisingly talkative if you know the right questions to ask. I spent the next 3 nights surviving on black coffee and adrenaline, peeling back the layers of my father's financial life. It did not take long to find the connection. The Whitmore Educational Trust was not a standalone account. It was a feeder fund linked to a limited liability company registered in Delaware called LW Management. I paid the $50 fee to access the company filings. The registered agent was Linda Whitmore. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady on the keyboard. I cross-referenced the tax filings available through a loophole in the state's transparency portal. The trust was not empty. It was not struggling. It held assets valued at over $500,000. I stared at the number. $500,000. When I was eating instant noodles to save money for textbooks, there was $500,000 sitting in an account bearing my family name. But the rage did not truly settle in until I looked at the transaction history. There was a wire transfer dated June 15th. That was the day of my graduation. The timestamp was 8:30 in the morning. I froze. At 8:30 in the morning, I was standing in the driveway being told the sedan had technical issues. At 8:30 in the morning, my father and stepmother were not dealing with a broken car. They were authorizing a transfer of $62,000 to a luxury car dealership. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The reason they could not drive me was not because the sedan was broken. It was because they needed both adults present to sign the final paperwork for the SUV before the ceremony began. They had weighed my attendance against the delivery of Jessica's gift, and the car had won. It was a logistical decision. I was simply an inconvenience to their schedule. I needed a second opinion. I took screenshots of the documents and encrypted them, sending the file to an old college friend named David, who worked in forensic accounting at a major bank. I called him 10 minutes later. "Lauren, I shouldn't even be looking at this," David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But look at the signature on the authorization form from 4 years ago, the one allowing the restructuring of the trust." "What about it?" I asked. "It's your father's signature, sure, but look at the witness line. It's dated, but the ink density is identical to a document signed 3 years prior. It looks like a digital lift. Lauren, I think they copied a signature from an old tax return to authorize this new company." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you saying it's fraud?" "I'm saying it's irregular. Highly irregular. If anyone audited this, your parents would be in serious trouble." I thanked him and hung up. I did not scream. I did not call my father to confront him. Instead, I picked up my phone and sent a text to the family group chat. "Thanks again for coming to the ceremony. It meant a lot to have you there. Love you all." I hit send. I needed them comfortable. I needed them to think I was the same compliant, oblivious daughter I had always been. I went back to the earliest digital records of the trust, finding a cached version of the original deed from 12 years ago. It was a PDF that had been archived by a web crawler on a legal notices site. I opened the file and scrolled to the section listed beneficiaries. There were 2 names listed originally: Jessica Whitmore, Lauren Whitmore. I looked at the current version filed with the state 2 years ago. Under beneficiaries, there was only one line: Jessica Whitmore. My name had not just been left out. It had been deleted. They had legally erased me from the family future, and they had used a forged witness signature to do it. I closed the laptop. The investigation was over. The war had just begun. 2 days later, I sat at the mahogany dining table in my father's house. The air smelled of rosemary chicken and expensive red wine. It was a celebration dinner, supposedly for both of us, but the conversation had revolved exclusively around the SUV parked in the driveway for the last 40 minutes. Jessica was glowing. She held her wine glass by the stem, gesturing wildly. The heated seats are insane, and the sound system. I can't believe how clear the bass is. Honestly, Dad, it's perfect. You deserve it. Princess, my father said, cutting into his steak with aggressive enthusiasm. Safety first. We need you reliable for your job hunt. I took a slow sip of water. I had been applying for jobs for 6 months while finishing my degree. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that rattled when it hit 40 miles per hour. Reliability was apparently a luxury reserved for the younger sibling. Speaking of finances, I said. My voice was soft, barely rising above the clink of silverware. I was looking into refinancing my student loans. The interest rates are brutal right now. Linda stopped chewing. Her eyes flicked to my father, then back to me. Well, that's just the reality of the economy. Lauren, everyone has to pay their dues. I know, I said, keeping my face open and innocent. But I was going through some old papers in the attic last Christmas. I thought I saw a folder for a Whitmore Educational Trust. I was wondering if maybe there was anything left in it. Even a few $1,000s would help with the interest. The silence that followed was instant and suffocating. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of guilt. Linda set her fork down with a sharp clatter. That trust was dissolved years ago. Lauren, the market crash in 2008 wiped it out. There is nothing there. Really, I asked, tilting my head. Because I thought trusts were usually more stable than that. I mean, surely there are records of where the assets went. Why are you grilling us? Linda snapped, her voice rising an octave. We just bought your sister a car because she needs it. You've been independent for years. You're 27. Don't tell me you're jealous of a graduation gift. I'm not jealous, I said calmly. I'm just asking about family history. My father finally looked up, but he did not look at me. He looked at his wine glass. Lauren, drop it. The money is gone. It was used for family emergencies. Over the years, emergencies, I repeated. Yes, he said, his face flushing red. And frankly, with your degree in data or whatever it is, I thought you'd be making enough money by now not to come looking for handouts. It's not a handout if it was in my name. Dad, I said. It was never your money, Linda blurted out. She realized her mistake immediately and tried to backtrack, her hand fluttering to her throat. I mean, it was family money. Our money. We decide how to allocate it. And we didn't think you would. Well, we didn't think you would mind helping your sister out. We didn't think you would notice, my father muttered under his breath, reaching for the wine bottle. He spoke quietly, but I heard him. We didn't think you would notice. That was the key. They did not see me as a threat. They saw me as the quiet one, the one who took the bus without complaining, the one who accepted the technical difficulties excuse without question. They thought my silence was stupidity. They thought my compliance was weakness. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, though it did not reach my eyes. You're right, I said, picking up my napkin and dabbing my mouth. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up. Let's get back to talking about the car. Does it have a sunroof? Jessica launched back into her description of the panoramic roof, relieved to have the spotlight back. Linda exhaled a long, shaky breath and took a large gulp of wine. They thought the danger had passed. They thought they had successfully bullied me back into submission. I watched them eat. I watched them laugh. I watched my father pour another glass of wine to steady his nerves. They had no idea that the data or whatever my father mocked was the very thing that was going to dismantle their comfortable little lies. I was done asking questions. From this moment on, I would let the numbers do the talking. I treated my family name like a hostile corporate entity. For the next 3 weeks, I did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. During the day, I was the model employee at Northbridge Analytics. At night, I turned my monitors toward the tangled web of my father's finances. Tracing the money was difficult, but not impossible. The $62,000 for the SUV was just the tip of the iceberg. I mapped out a network of shell entities that all fed back into the main trust. There was a company called Riverfront Solutions, which sounded impressive, but had no website and no employees. Its registered address was a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I pulled the transaction logs for Riverfront Solutions. The expenses were categorized with vague, bureaucratic labels. Educational support. $12,000, August 2019, Living stipend, $18,000, January 2020. I stared at the dates. In August of 2019, I had been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I could not afford a meal plan. In January of 2020, I was working double shifts at a call center to pay my rent. But according to these ledgers, I, or at least a student in this family, had received $30,000 in 6 months. The money had gone to pay the rent on a luxury apartment downtown. I knew that apartment. Jessica had lived there for a gap year to find herself while taking online art classes she never finished. It was all technically legal on paper. My father had set up the trust with broad discretionary powers for the trustee, allowing funds to be used for general welfare and maintenance, but the ethical violation was staggering. They had listed these expenses as essential educational costs to avoid gift taxes, all while telling me the coffers were empty. I did not keep this data on my laptop. I was too paranoid for that. I copied the files onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. One went into a safety deposit box at a bank across town. One went into the hollowed-out heel of an old winter boot in my closet. The third stayed on my person at all times. I needed advice on the legal exposure, so I called Silas, a retired forensic accountant who had mentored me during my internship. We met at a noisy diner where we could not be overheard. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a flowchart of the money laundering. Silas put on his reading glasses. He studied the paper for a long time, his brow furrowing. Finally, and when he looked up, his expression grim. "Lauren, this is dangerous. Not physically, maybe, but once you pull this thread, the whole sweater unravels. You are talking about tax fraud. You are talking about piercing the corporate veil. I know. I said, if you use this, your parents could face audits, heavy fines, maybe worse." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "You have to ask yourself, is it worth destroying the family over money? It isn't about the money." "Silas," I said, my voice flat. "It's about the fact that they looked me in the eye and told me I was a burden while they were spending my future on vacation rentals." I went back to the documents that night with a renewed, icy resolve. I was looking for the original funding source, the seed of the trust. I found a scanned image of the original deed from 20 years ago, buried in a mislabeled folder within the zipped archive my father had accidentally forwarded. I read through the dense legal jargon, clause after clause of standard boilerplate text, and then, on page 14, in a section titled Contingencies and Reversion, my breath caught in my throat. Clause 7C. In the event that the primary beneficiary structure is altered, or if more than 50% of the liquid assets are dispersed for non-tuition purposes within a single fiscal year, the remaining principal shall immediately vest in equal shares to all surviving biological children of the grantor to prevent dissipation of the estate. I reread it 3 times. All surviving biological children. When they kicked me off the beneficiary list, they had triggered a failsafe. They likely did not even understand or remember. By draining the account to buy the car and pay for Jessica's lifestyle, they had violated the 50% rule. According to their own legal document, the moment they bought that SUV, the entire remaining fund did not belong to the trust anymore. It legally belonged to Jessica and me. Split 50-50. They were not just hoarding family money. They were spending my money, and I finally had the piece of paper that proved it. The summons arrived on a Tuesday evening in the form of a voicemail. It was my father, his voice tight and lacking its usual booming confidence. He asked me to come over for a discussion about my future, a phrase that usually meant they wanted to criticize my career choices or ask why I was still single. But this time, the tone suggested something different. It sounded like damage control. I arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. The house was quiet, the television was off, and the curtains were drawn against the fading sunlight. My father and stepmother were sitting in the living room, positioned on the stiff floral sofa like they were waiting for a deposition. There was no dinner on the table tonight. There was only a single white envelope and a pitcher of ice water. I sat in the armchair opposite them, keeping my posture rigid. I did not smile. "Lauren," My father started, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. We've been thinking a lot about what you said at dinner the other night, about your loans, and, well, we realize things have been tight for you. He slid the white envelope across the coffee table. It stopped inches from my hand. I opened it. Inside was a personal check made out to me. $15,000. I read aloud. It's a gift, Linda said quickly, her smile trembling at the edges. To help you make a dent in the principal. We want you to feel supported. I looked from the check to their faces. They looked anxious. They were waiting for me to be grateful. They were waiting for me to take the money and apologize for asking questions. This is generous, I said slowly, placing the check back on the table. But gifts usually don't require a summit meeting. What is the condition? There's no condition, my father said, though his eyes darted to the window. We just think it would be best if we moved forward as a family without digging up old financial history that might cause unnecessary stress. You know how easily things can be misunderstood. I pretended to consider this. I furrowed my brow, acting as if I was weighing the $15,000 against my curiosity. I understand, I said softly. So, just to be clear, this money is coming from your personal savings, because if the trust was dissolved in 2008, like you said, I wouldn't want to take from your retirement. Of course it's from savings, Linda said, relaxing slightly. The trust is, well, it's been inactive for years. Ever since we had to amend the beneficiary paperwork, the accounts have been dormant. The room went dead silent. Linda froze. She realized the slip the second the words left her mouth. If the trust had been dissolved due to a market crash, there would be no paperwork to amend. There would be no accounts to be dormant or active. I looked at her, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. Amend the paperwork. But you said there was no money left. Why would you pay legal fees to amend paperwork on an empty account? I didn't mean amend, Linda stammered, her face turning a patchy red. I meant close out, just finalizing the closure. That's not what you said, I pressed, my voice hardening. You said beneficiary paperwork. You can't change a beneficiary on a closed account. Linda! Who did you change it to? Enough, my father slammed his hand on the armrest of the sofa. He stood up, his face twisted in a mixture of guilt and defensive anger. Stop cross-examining her. Lauren? It's family business. I am family, I shouted back, standing up to meet him. Or am I? Because it seems like I'm just a liability you pay off when I get too noisy. We had to make choices, he yelled. Jessica, she isn't like you. She needs help. She needs a safety net. You've always been the strong one. You survive everything. We knew you would figure it out. We couldn't take that risk with her. The admission hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He had finally said it. He did not leave me out because he didn't love me. He left me out because he didn't think he had to buy my success. He punished me for my competence and rewarded her for her dependence. So you picked a side, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You didn't just help her. You cannibalized my share to build her safety net. It's not like that, Linda whispered, tears forming in her eyes. We were just trying to be parents. No, I said. You were trying to be her parents. You stopped being mine a long time ago. I looked down at the check for $15,000. It was a bribe. It was a fraction of what they owed me, offered to buy my silence so they could continue their charade. I picked up the check. My father exhaled, thinking he had won. Then I ripped it in half. I don't want your charity, I said, dropping the pieces on the pristine carpet. And I don't want your silence. I turned and walked to the door. My father called my name, his voice cracking, but I did not look back. I stepped out into the cool evening air, my heart pounding not with fear, but with triumph. They were scared. They were sloppy. And most importantly, my father had just verbally confirmed that they had made a choice to exclude me. He thought that was an excuse. He didn't realize it was a confession. The backlash was swift and calculated. It began less than 12 hours after I walked out of my father's living room. I stood at the counter of a coffee shop on 4th Street, attempting to buy a latte and a bagel. When I tapped my debit card, the machine emitted a harsh, rejecting beep. I tried again. The result was the same. I stepped out of the line, my face burning, and pulled up my banking app. A red banner stretched across the top of the screen. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. I dialed the bank immediately. After 20 minutes of holding, a customer service representative came on the line. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitmore," the voice said, sounding robotic and detached. But a flag was raised by a joint holder regarding potential unauthorized transfers. Until the dispute is resolved, all assets are frozen. I hung up. My father was still a co-signer on that account from when I opened it at 16. I had forgotten to remove him. It was a petty, tactical strike designed to starve me out. He knew I lived paycheck to paycheck. He knew freezing my meager savings of $2,000 would cripple me. My phone buzzed again. It was not the bank. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. "Stop digging. You are hurting people you love. This is your only warning." I stared at the screen. They were trying to scare me. They wanted me to feel small and helpless, the way I felt on the bus ride to graduation. But fear is a reaction to the unknown, and I knew exactly what was happening. I did not panic. Instead, I called the fraud department of the bank that managed the Whitmore Educational Trust. I did not call as a daughter. I called as a whistleblower. "My name is Lauren Whitmore. I told the investigator on the other end, I am sending you a secure file containing 5 years of ledger discrepancies for the trust managed by Linda Whitmore. You will find that 52% of the principal was liquidated in violation of the founding charter." By noon on Wednesday, the internal audit had begun. My friend David had helped route my evidence to the right compliance officers, bypassing the local branch managers who played golf with my father. I was no longer just a disgruntled relative. I was a cooperating witness in an investigation regarding fiduciary mismanagement. The fallout hit the family home by Thursday evening. I knew this because my phone lit up with a call from Jessica. I hesitated, then answered. "Lauren." Her voice was high and trembling. "Lauren, I don't understand what's happening. I tried to fill up the SUV today, and the gas card didn't work. The attendant said the account was suspended. I'm sorry, Jessica," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Dad is yelling at someone on the phone in his office," she continued, her breathing erratic. "He's talking about subpoenas, and Mom is crying in the kitchen. She keeps saying you ruined everything. Lauren, why are you doing this? I didn't do this." "Jess," I said. "I'm just asking for the math to be corrected. It's just money," she screamed, the facade of the sweet younger sister cracking. "We were a family. You're tearing us apart over some stupid accounting error." "It wasn't an error," I said. "It was a choice. And now, the bank is making a choice too." I hung up before she could say anything else. I blocked her number. Then I blocked my father, then Linda. My apartment was silent. My bank account was frozen. I had $50 in cash in my wallet to last me until the investigation cleared my name. I was completely isolated. I had no parents, no sister, and no safety net. But as I looked at the wall where I had taped up the timeline of transactions, I felt a strange sense of peace. The warning text had been right about one thing: I was hurting people. But for the first time in 27 years, the people hurting were not me. The gears of the institution were finally turning, grinding slowly toward the truth, and no amount of guilt-tripping or intimidation could stop them now. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the bank's corporate headquarters was cold enough to preserve meat. A long glass table separated the opposing factions. On one side sat the bank's senior compliance officer and 2 lawyers. On the other side sat my father, Linda, and Jessica. I sat at the head of the table, alone, acting as the independent consultant who had provided the encryption keys to the ledger. My parents were dressed for church. My father wore his best navy suit, and Linda was draped in pearls, trying to project an image of old money respectability. Jessica just looked small. She was wearing a hoodie and jeans, clearly dragged here without a full briefing. She kept glancing at me, her eyes wide and confused. But I did not look back. I looked at the spreadsheet projected on the wall. Ms. Whitmore's data is irrefutable. The compliance officer, a man named Mr. Vance, said without looking up from his file. The trust established in 1998 was a restrictive instrument. It explicitly forbade the liquidation of assets for anything other than tuition or medical emergencies until the youngest beneficiary turned 30. Yet, we see withdrawals totaling nearly $200,000 over 5 years. It was an administrative misunderstanding, my father interrupted, his voice booming too loud for the small room. We borrowed against the principal. We fully intended to replace the funds once the market corrected itself. It was a loan, not a theft. A loan requires documentation, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his bluster like a razor. There are no promissory notes. There are no repayment schedules. There are only receipts for luxury goods. Lauren, please, Linda hissed, leaning forward. Don't do this in front of strangers. We can explain this at home. We are past home, I said. I tapped the laptop in front of me. The image on the wall changed to a timeline. Let's look at June 15th, my graduation day. The room went silent. On that morning, at 8:30, I continued, keeping my eyes locked on my father. You told me the family sedan was broken. You told me there was no room in the new SUV because of camera equipment. You forced me to walk 2 miles in high heels to catch the number 42 bus so I would not miss my own ceremony. We were stressed, my father shouted. It was a chaotic morning. It was not chaotic. I corrected him. It was calculated. At 8:32, while I was waiting at the bus stop, your signature was recorded at the dealership. You weren't fixing a car. You were finalizing the wire transfer of $62,000 from the Education Trust. You couldn't drive me because you were too busy spending my tuition money on Jessica's gift. I saw the color drain from Jessica's face. She turned slowly toward our father. Dad, she whispered. You said the money came from a bonus at work. You said the car was paid for. It is paid for, my father snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. It doesn't matter which account it came from. Jessica, it's all family money. It matters, I said, because under the contingency clause, once you drain the account below 50% for a non-educational purpose, the trust dissolved. That money wasn't yours to spend anymore. It belonged to us. Equally. I looked at Jessica. For the first time, the entitlement that had shielded her for 22 years evaporated. She looked at the projection on the wall. She saw the dates. She saw the amounts. She saw the reality that her comfort had been purchased with my exclusion. You made her take the bus, Jessica said, her voice trembling. You made her take the bus so you could buy me a car with her money? It's not her money, Linda shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. She's an adult. She doesn't need it. That is for a court to decide. Mr. Vance said, closing his folder with a final, heavy thud. But from the bank's perspective, this is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. We are freezing all associated assets effective immediately pending a federal audit. My father slumped back in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He realized that the daughter he had ignored for decades had not just been taking notes. I had been building a cage, and he had just walked right into it. The final report from the forensic audit arrived 3 weeks later. It was a thick, spiral-bound document that landed on the mahogany table with a heavy, final thud. The findings were not just damning. They were catastrophic. The auditors had gone back 7 years, uncovering a systematic looting of the trust that went far beyond the SUV. There were withdrawals for cultural immersion trips that were actually luxury cruises to the Mediterranean for my parents and Jessica. There were housing allowances that paid for a remodel of the master bathroom in the family home. The total misappropriation of funds amounted to nearly $350,000. I sat in the corner of the room, my hands folded in my lap. I watched my father read the summary. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. "This classifies as tax fraud," the lead attorney said, his voice void of any sympathy. "You claimed tax exemptions on an educational trust while using it as a personal piggy bank. The IRS has already been notified. You are looking at penalties, back taxes, and potential criminal charges for embezzlement if the beneficiaries choose to press charges." My father looked up. He did not look at the lawyer. He looked at me. "Lauren," he croaked, his voice barely audible, We can work this out. We can set up a payment plan. Please, don't let them file criminal charges. It would destroy my practice." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me there was no money for my textbooks while he was booking first-class tickets to Italy. "It is not up to me anymore, Dad," I said calmly. "The bank is the trustee. They are liable. They have to report it to save themselves." I did not feel happy. I did not feel a rush of vengeance. I felt a hollow, exhausting sadness. I was officially recognized as the primary injured party in the legal briefs, a title that sounded clinical and cold. It confirmed that my entire adulthood had been sabotaged not by bad luck, but by theft. As we left the office, the hallway felt miles long. Jessica was waiting by the elevator. She looked 10 years older than she had on graduation day. Her new car had been repossessed by the bank as a liquid asset pending the investigation. She was wearing old sneakers and no makeup. She stepped in front of me, her hands shaking. "Lauren, wait," she stammered, tears spilling over her lashes. I didn't know. You have to believe me. I thought we were just lucky. I never asked where the money came from. I looked at her. I believed her. In a way. She was not malicious. She was just willfully blind. She had enjoyed the view from the passenger seat so much that she never bothered to look at the road map. "Ignorance is a luxury, Jessica," I said softly, "and it was bought with my money." "I can fix it," she cried, reaching out to grab my sleeve. "I'll get a job. I'll pay you back. Every cent. Please, don't walk away from us." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "You can't pay me back. The interest on this debt isn't financial. It's time. You took my time. You took my peace of mind. You can't write a check for that." I walked into the elevator and let the doors close between us. That was the last time I saw them as a family unit. By the next morning, the story had broken containment. In a town of 20,000 people, court filings do not stay secret. The Midwest Gazette ran the story on page 3, but it was the online forums where it really caught fire. The headline was sensational, but accurate: local executive accused of defrauding daughter's trust fund. But it was the detail about the bus that captured the public imagination. The image of a girl in a graduation gown riding public transit while her family drove a stolen luxury car became a symbol of suburban rot. People I had not spoken to in years messaged me. Neighbors gave my parents cold stares in the grocery store. The country club revoked my father's membership, citing a morality clause in the bylaws. They had spent years curating an image of perfect success. They had sacrificed my dignity to polish that image. Now, the truth was out, and it was uglier than any poverty they could have imagined. They wanted to be the envy of the town. Instead, they had become a cautionary tale, and all I had done was tell the truth about how I got to graduation. The settlement offer came 2 weeks later. It was not a heartfelt apology or a tearful reunion. It was a sterile document presented by my father's attorney, proposing a lump sum payment to avoid a public trial. They wanted to frame it as a retroactive gift, a way to quietly close the ledger without admitting fault. They still wanted to play the role of the benevolent benefactors. I sat in the quiet conference room and slid the paperwork back across the table. "I will not sign this," I said, my voice steady. "Lauren, please," my father said, his voice ragged and thin. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of his arrogance. It's more money than the original share. We are trying to make it right. If this goes to court, the reputation of the firm, It will be destroyed. It is not about the amount. Dad, I said, it is about the definition. If I take this as a gift, you get to pretend you were generous. If I take this as court-ordered restitution, everyone knows you were thieves. I don't want your generosity. I want judgment. I watched his face crumble. He realized then that he could not buy his way out of the narrative I had constructed. The legal process moved forward. The fines were levied. The back taxes were calculated. The local papers ran follow-up stories that turned the Whitmore name into social poison in our small town. My stepmother stopped going to her garden club. Jessica deactivated her social media accounts. The facade of the perfect family did not just crack, it pulverized. 2 months later, I accepted a senior analyst position at a firm in Chicago. It was a 3-hour drive from my hometown, far enough to ensure I would never accidentally run into them at a grocery store. The salary was 60% higher than my previous job. On my second weekend in the city, I walked into a car dealership. I did not bring a parent. I did not bring a cosigner. I stood on the lot and looked at a charcoal gray sedan. It was not flashy. It did not have a panoramic sunroof or heated leather seats. But it was solid. It was reliable. "Do you need to call anyone to run the financing?" the salesman asked. "No," I said. Pulling out my checkbook, "I will be paying in full." I wrote the check for $28,000 using money I had earned, saved, and recovered through the lawsuit. My hand did not shake. When he handed me the keys, they felt heavy and cool in my palm. I drove off the lot, merging onto the highway with the windows down. The wind whipped through my hair, smelling of asphalt and freedom. I thought about that humid morning in June. I thought about the sweat dripping down my back on the number 42 bus. I thought about how my parents believed that forcing me onto public transit was a minor inconvenience, a way to put me in my place. They were right about one thing. It did put me in my place. It put me in the position of an observer, a recorder, and ultimately, a judge. They thought that bus ride was just a way to get to a stadium. They never realized that for me. It was the vehicle that carried me away from them forever. They thought it was a commute. I turned it into an indictment. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to read in the comments where you are listening from today and what you would have done in my situation. So please share your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.